So I'm assuming the spoilers for this chapter for 1090 probably came out on like Wednesday or Thursday, and then like the fan translated chapter was up on Saturday. And I didn't know that until like Saturday at like 9 o'clock at night after I'd seen the Barbie movie. um, and I was like, well, I have to do the Barbie movie on Sunday because I need to get that review done for that, or else it's going to go out of my head because I've only seen it once and I can't do reference material as easily for it. Um, and then that took like all afternoon to do. And then now Monday, I'm going to get to do the 9 or 1090 review. By the way, I have not watched anybody else's reviews for this. I try not to do that before I do my own, just because I don't want to be influenced by what other people say. So, in that regard, I need to change my light back here. There we go. Do fade colors as opposed to one specific color. So, time for chapter 1090 for One Piece. Oh boy. So the title is just Admiral Kizaru. He's pretty important in the chapter. For the cover page, we actually have Kuro, or Clawhador, possibly him and his Clawhador persona, unless they decided to finally give us a post-time skip, Kuro. And it's a fan request of him reading books peacefully with a bunch of black cats. So, my sister and her kids have a black cat, and I got to pet it earlier this weekend. It's pretty nice. It's a pretty sweet cat. Then we just dive back in literally to where the last chapter left off, where after the Straw Hats have, York captured, and they had York call the Gorosei and talk with them and make that deal. So now we just have like Luffy literally picking up. I have Luffy back. Wave. Are you ready to go into Gear 5th? You got a long ways to go. But you will. Okay, you go back over here. We literally have the Luffy picks up the Den Mushi. The way Luffy, normally answers the phone. I'm Monkey D. Luffy. I'm going to be king of the pirates. Blah, 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 blah. All of that. Which is pretty apt considering how the most recent episode ended with Luffy as Gear 5th still proclaiming that he's still Luffy and he's still going to be king of the pirates and everything with that for the anime. So, nice, good setup there. Then again, that is just typically how Luffy answers his, Den Mushi whenever anybody calls him. That's just probably his default voicemail setting. I don't know if Den Mushi have voicemails. But that's Luffy's default Den Mushi. Hi, you've reached Monkey D. Luffy. I'm gonna be king of the pirates. Please leave a message after the snail burps. Burp. I don't know. That would be interesting. And he's like, we're in alliance with Vegapunk, and if you care about York's safety, then you'll leave the fleet. You and your fleet will leave and everything. So Luffy's at least somewhat attempting, I guess, to pull off the hostage negotiations, and York is just like screaming, "Save me!" in the background. And then of course we get reaction shots for who's paying attention. We have Kizaru kind of like, "Oh no," and then we just have some of the other random Marines are just like, "Oh no, how could they? They are horrible." And then we have like in the World Economic Times where we have like Morgan's like laughing about this. This is, oh my god, this is amazing. What's happening over there? Luffy, Luffy! She's so happy. And then of course we just have Wapple in the background, who is probably still freaking out over, what we found out he saw very recently with Cobra and everything. And then we cut to where we have, the rest of the Gorosei in their room of authority, where they're just like talking and everything, and it's just like, so you're Straw Hat Luffy. Okay, well, it's nice to talk to you. You're very eloquent. Blah, 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 blah. It's like, so you are in the Lavos field right now. And Luffy just kind of tries to go off on something. And he's like, yeah, if you count our injured ones and blah, 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 blah. And then he gets pulled off the phone by either Usopp or Nami, because they're right there as well. They pull Luffy away from the phone to say, don't tell them that. And I think it's actually Robin that does it, that says that, because one of the other elders, I think it's Shepherd, is like, huh, is that Nico Robin? And then we cut to where we have like Nami just face palming, and then Robin on the floor. And Robin seems to be slightly injured, so she was probably involved in like taking down York, and may have gotten attacked by the Seraphim at that point in time. She's slightly injured, but she seems okay. She's been in far worse scrapes than this. And she's just like, don't tell them that, Luffy, and all of that stuff. And like Usopp's like, yeah, don't tell them that. Don't give them information. That's gonna help the Marines. Um, and everything. And we see Saturn listening in on this as well. And he's like, He's like listing off their priority of things to, I'm assuming he's talking to Doberman at this point in time, because that's who we see in the room with him. And he's just like, our priorities at the moment are three things that we have to protect. We need to protect the physical safety of Punk Records. We need to protect York, and we need to protect the lab where they can make the or power set up the mother flame. So we need to check those. We need to protect those. Those are the high priority things. And he's like, everything else is fairly irrelevant. And then Doberman's like, well, what about the rest of the CP0 agents that are there? You know, Kaku and Lucci. I don't think they know at this point in time that Stussy betrayed them, but at least Kaku and Lucci. Or, given things we might find out in a moment in the chapter, they may know that Stussy has betrayed them. And they're like, well, what about them? And he's like, yeah, they're good agents to hold on to. So he's just like, But then he's just like, humans are of no, humans are no different from insects. If their numbers reduce, they will just multiply again. So he's just like, he's not worried about the Straw Hats necessarily. He's like, you can wipe out all of them. And I mean, by a technicality, they would possibly want to keep Robin alive, given certain things that she knows, also still with Frankie, but for the same reasons as Enies Lobby, for why they wanted Robin and Frankie in the first place. Probably those would be useful. But now that they know that Vegapunk has been researching the Void Century, he would probably, they would probably be able to use Vegapunk's information that would be in Punk Records in order to be able to, use that to find possibly where Laugh-Tale is, or at least find where the other poneglyphs are. So that way they can then find their way to Laugh-Tale. Again, this would still involve them having to get into Wano and having to get to Zoe, and Big Mom's territory isn't as much of a threat anymore, but still, to get to those poneglyphs and everything. And then we have York still screaming into the phone. She's like, you heard all of that, right? I made a deal with them. No, just, you can't hurt me. She's like, your manager will hear about this. And it's like what she's doing. My manager will hear about this. And then Nami just kind of whacks her. And she's like, yeah, that's what you get. And, they're like, taking care of Robin. Chopper's like looking over Robin. Nami is quite angry at this point in time. And I think it's actually Zoro that's trying to prevent Nami from hurting York in the background, which is kind of funny. Because it's usually Nami like holding Zoro back at times, which is just great. So there's that little dynamic there, which I know in the live action, we're going to see a little bit more of like the Zoro-Nami dynamic a little bit, which is just kind of a fun dynamic anyway. So, Chopper's taking care of Robin and making sure she's okay. So Robin was in the room the whole time. She was in the room where it happened, to throw out a Hamilton reference there, since I've seen that so much recently. And then we have, basically we're finding out who else is in the room at this point in time. And it's basically most everybody else is in the room from what we can see now that we get like a much more bigger perspective of the room at this point in time. We see Luffy and Bonnie are still chowing down on food. Usopp seems to be trying to work on communications. York is still on the floor. Vegapunk is there fine. We see Kaku and Lucci off on the corner, or off in the background, and Kaku is like on the laying down, probably resting. He probably got a couple of injuries from S-Hawk. We also see Atlas there, and she's working on something, trying again to work on figuring out about Pythagoras and Edison and everything like that. We also see Lilith there, and she is actually cradling Edison, who has been like bandaged up. So we know that Atlas is probably still in pretty much full functioning order. Since we saw Frankie was no longer petrified or Usopp were no longer petrified in the last chapter, we kind of concluded that Lilith is probably not petrified anymore either. I believe they state, let me check. I believe they do state that, that the Seraphim have been dealt with, but like Haku's like, Kaku's like, even though I was facing 2 of the Seraphim, I'm still ashamed of myself. Because, okay, so that meant he was facing at least S Hawk and maybe one of the other ones. Maybe S Shark showed up, or maybe he had to deal with S Snake. Because like Luffy and Lucci seem to be the ones that handled S Bear. So that was probably what happened there. And then Lucci is just kind of like, he's slightly reassuring because Lucci and Kaku actually get along fairly well. He's like, yeah, I know how you feel. Just forget about it and get some rest. I mean, it has been shown that Lucci does, to some degree, care about his team. He cares about the rest of the CP, or the former CP9, now CP Aegis Zero agents and stuff. So we get to see some of that. And Lucci and Kaku, I think they're kind of hinted to be at least, well, the closest thing that Lucci has to a best friend that's not a pigeon, is Kaku. Which, I mean, having a giraffe for a best friend is still pretty good. I mean, giraffes are awesome. So we're getting to see that, what's Atlas doing? Atlas is just working on trying to, or I think it's Lilith that's actually the one that's crying, because she's just like, Shaka, Pythagoras, Edison. She's just like so beat up about this, which are actually like, Lilith is, the evil aspect of Vegapunk and everything, but it's just like she clearly cares about her other, the other satellites and the Stella body and everything. So we're definitely seeing that very much evident here. She's cradling Edison, who seems to at least be somewhat patched up. We know that Shaka got shot, so he's probably not going to be around for a while unless they have a way of like fixing that. And Pythagoras kind of got blown up, so I don't really know what to say about that. Atlas is just working on some other stuff. She's like, Atlas, Edison is gonna be fine. He's fine. He's alive. It's okay. And then, as I said, Usopp is working on trying to connect comms to down to probably where Sentomaru is at this point in time. We see Lilith and Edison are talking, and then we also see we're getting these like little, what appear to be like little whispers that are going on, and we find out that it's Lucci that's whispering, and he's like, for the state of the Vegapunk satellites, 4 are heavily injured, 2 are dead. As for the Straw Hats, he's like whispering, and then like Haku's like, what are you whispering for? And Lucci's just like, shut up and don't worry about it. I'm talking to myself. Which, a CP's Aegis Zero agent talking to themselves and whispering about what's going on in the room, oh, that's not suspicious at all. But the others aren't paying attention. Admittedly, again, we're going to find out what happened with that in a minute. And then we have Usopp having finally connected the comms down to where the other CP agents were the ones that were being held captive by York, that kept getting, sent to the island and then supposedly left, but they never actually left. They were just put down into like the devil fruit testing area. And that's where they are right now. And they're just like feasting on like a bunch of the food and everything that like Vegapunk and the Straw Hats gave them and everything. And they're actually like celebrating the Straw Hats. So again, this is, it's kind of similar to what happened with the Marines, the G5 Marines, I think, that were in Punk Hazard, that like saw the way that the Straw Hats actually operate, like how the Straw Hats were protecting the kids and how the Straw Hats helped them and how they helped Toshigi and Smoker and everything, and how they, all of that stuff. So they actually saw what the Straw Hats were actually capable of, but they also saw that the Straw Hats are not bad pirates. So it's like, from the CP, Cypher Pole agents' perspective, the Straw Hats could have very easily just left them to starve within, within those chambers, and just left them there and like not done anything, and like it would have been no skin off our backs. But they didn't. They fed them because that's the way that they work. And they're just like, oh my god, yay! And they're like, wait, we can't celebrate that. So it's like it's the back and the forth, like the same thing that we saw with the Marines on Punk Hazard with the kids and everything, with them going back and forth for like, we like them, but we don't like them, but they're pirates, but they helped us, but they're pirates, but they so it's just like that back and forth type of a thing and everything. And like, and they're communicating with Usopp. And like they're just like, oh, thank God. It was like, don't call them out. They're still the enemies, but like they saved us and they gave us food and all this other fun stuff, food and water and all that stuff. So they're not starving anymore. So they're that, but they're just like, but there's there's things out here that are kind of still creeping us out. And we look over and we see the seraphim that are all wrapped in bubbles that are all pretty well, it's stated that these are the same type of bubbles that the Pacifista Mark IIIs can put out. So they're bubbles that are based off of like sea prism stone, where they have like sea prism mixed into their lining. And all four of the seraphim that are on the island, as bear, as snake, as hawk, and as shark are all inside of them. And then as hawk's sword is just like stabbed to the ground in front of him. And we get a much better look at it. And while it is probably based off of Yoru, it is not exactly Yoru. So you get a better look at it here. So they're just all like sitting in the bubbles. S bear is just calmly sitting there. S shark is just calmly sitting there. S snake looks slightly annoyed, and so does S hawk, which is not necessarily an emotion you want to see on anyone that looks like Mihawk, is them looking annoyed. So they're like, yeah, these things are still down there. And they're like, but wait, aren't the Seraphim our allies now? It's just like, yeah, but they could go out of control again. And they're like, well, yeah, that is technically true. But, and Vegapunk's like assuring them that, oh, of course, because those bubbles are made from the same stuff that the Mark IIIs have, they can't get out of them. The bubbles are designed to be able to encase them. And prevent them from getting out, because it negates whatever devil fruit power they have, which would then, because of the green blood, would then make them weaker. And such. So we get that explained there, has the same priorities of sea stone and everything. And the Mihawk one is just like, how dare you lock us up here? Lock us in here. And Boa is just like, or a snake's like, and like, so we're getting all of that. And it's just like, oh, they're, yeah, I think they like fixed the orders that were given to the Seraphim. So the Seraphim are back on following the orders of like Vegapunk Prime off the Cell body. And even, even S Snake is like, well, you don't have to worry about us since we didn't receive any orders to eliminate you. You're of no concern to us. Like, the Seraphim may not have been ordered to attack the different CP0, the CP agents that are down there. Also, Vegapunk has like these video transponder snail setups where they're like on top of like a video screen setup, and like then that way they can get both audio and visual, which is a very good way of doing that, because we've seen visual Den Mushi before. Like, we've seen those for like when they do like Uta's concert and in Film Red, and like other cases where we've seen that. But this is a little bit more of like a slimmed down version, like a zoom version of a Den Mushi, which is kind of adorable. And the agents are like, okay, well, that's a relief. And then we have Frankie show up, and he's talking to S Snake, and he's like, well, even you're so great. Even so, we're so grateful to you, S Snake. And it was just like, thank you for undoing the petrification on us. And and Vegapunk is like, yeah, that's right. I don't remember programming her to act like that. And then we cut to this little tiny flashback from like S Snake's perspective, where like Luffy had shown up, and he's like looking at S Snake, and he's like, Hancock, and he's like, because he recognizes her as some form of Hancock of Boa, and he's just like, these are my comrades. You have to undo your powers on them. Please, you're the only one who can save them. And she's just like, and it's just like her getting all flustered and everything, the same way that like the real Boa gets. She's just like, okay, fine, I'll undo it. So please stop staring at my eyes like that directly and everything, because she is not used to that at all. So, okay, this means that, and Okay, so I had made a comment back when we first found out about the Seraphim and everything, that they're made from the clones, from the lineage factor of the different warlords, of the original seven warlords. And, we know that Boa has, the huge crush, is head over heels in love with Luffy and do whatever, and would, do whatever he asked, pretty much. I don't think she would willingly hurt her own sisters or her own people on Luffy's request, but pretty much most anything else she would, probably do on Luffy's request. Um, and the Seraphim one seems to be the same way. And I had made the comment that I was comparing the Seraphim to Stitch from Lilo and Stitch. And of course, throughout the course of the movie of Lilo and Stitch, Stitch learns to become much more adept with his emotions. And from there, he learns more, and everything, and he, experiences, Earth and Lilo and Nani and family and Ohana and everything, and that makes him turn good. It makes him actually develop more. And in this case, it's I would have to say that probably for Hancock, for a snake specifically, a lot of people theorize it like, oh, the government would have had her blood from when she was a slave. It's like, I don't think they were taking blood from every single slave that ever ended up in Marie's Walk, because that would have been a large amount of slaves and not a lot of results coming from it. Because a lot of them, while they may have been different races and stuff like that, were fairly everyday people. So my thought is that they did not take Boa's lineage factor to then use to grow the Seraphim, to grow as Snake, until after she had developed these feelings for Luffy. So I don't think Boa ever got seriously injured during the battle at Marineford, but maybe they forced her to come to one of the other warlord meetings at some point, because they made her do that as like a show of, loyalty or something like that, and she, complied for whatever reason, because she had to, because she was convinced to do it, whatever. And that's where they got her, lineage factor there from, like, stuff from any of her utensils or whatever, from like her cups or her food or whatever, and got it that way. Or they just implemented the Seraphim idea because they saw how effective the pacifistas were at Marineford, and they're like, okay, this Seraphim program is like full steam ahead, and that's when they were getting their genetics. Admittedly, they would have already had to have had genetics from Crocodile and the others, so it probably would have been in the works for a while, but I'm kind of hoping that that meant that they didn't really have Boa's stuff, because she wasn't really all that big member of the warlords at that point in time. And I don't see it that this Snake would have been exactly able to just immediately develop these feelings for Luffy, because it still took Hancock a little while to fully develop her love sickness for Luffy. So I think it's something that would have already had to have been there. But we get Jinbei in the background laughing next to Vegapunk. He's like, yeah, it's just like, yeah, she's the perfect copy of Hancock. She looks down on everyone else except Luffy. It's just so funny, and everything that the Seraphim based off of her is acting that way. So that showed that the Seraphim were capable of independent thought, or at the very least that Hancock's one, that S. Snake was capable of independent thought. And whether or not that can be applied to the other ones, because even Vegapunk is like, oh, this is very interesting, this is very unexpected that these pieces of information were transferred through the lineage factor and into the cloning process. That's very interesting. And then we just have Luffy going, thank you again, Hancock, and like waving at her into the screen, and she's just like blushing with all the hearts coming off and like covering her face, which is adorable. She's just like, did you say that you love me? I was just like, I know that people have drawn fan art of like Luffy of real Hancock meeting S. Snake and like seeing her with Luffy and just getting very jealous over that, which would be hilarious. And then we cut to where we have, Atlas talking to Stella, and she's like, all of the comm system are working against, but I still can't open the Frontier Dome. And he's like, well, we can't escape if we can't disable the barrier and everything. So this is where we're getting more into kind of like the more issue of what's going on here. And we have York basically saying that she set up a password, but that she did not upload it into their shared brain, into the Punk records. And So since she did not upload that, she is the only one that knows what it is. This is where having a scroll to change into York might be very helpful. Um, I watched Secret Invasion on Disney Plus, and I very much liked it. So it's like she's just like, yeah, that's one of my bargaining chips, so you can't hurt me. And so we get Lilith getting angry at her and trying to attack York, and like Edison's like pulling her off. And she's like, yeah, the government, the password in the government are my two armors to protect me. By the way, I'm getting hungry. Yeah. And Lilith is just angry at her. And then we see Stussy off to the side, and she's just like, we're surrounded from every side, Stella. The fleet comprises 100 ships and nearly 30,000 Marines on board. So again, they're able to at least determine the numbers of that, or at the very least, Stussy, Kaku, and Lucci were somewhat aware of what was going to be heading their way. And, we see Sanji there, and he's just like, trying to give her tea and everything, and he's just like, she's just like, Miss Stussy, would you like some coffee and everything? And then Vegapunk looks over at Nami and is just like, you said your name was Nami, right? You're the navigator of the crew. She's like, yep. Now, admittedly, Shaka recognized Zoro and Robin right off the bat from the crew, so I would assume the other ones would still have, like, pretty much anytime there's, like, new batches of bounty posters that probably go out, they probably upload that information into Punk Records, so that way they all know about it. That doesn't mean that they all actually pay attention to it. But Stella is, like, recognizing Nami and everything. It's like, you're the navigator, right? And he's like, well, what's going on with the log post? So she looks at the log post and she's like, well, it hasn't set for this island yet, but we still have the directions set from when we were at Wano. So we know that, Law went one way, Luffy went one way, and Kid went one way. And we know that Kid ended up at Wiener Island, and they really don't want to go there because that's where Blackbeard is. And then, Law ended up at Wiener Island. Kid ended up at Elbath, and then, like, I think Egghead kind of ended up being the middle path, if I remember correctly. I don't remember exactly. But they're like, well, if we go that way, Vegapunk is like looking at the directions, and he's like, oh, well, if we go that way and everything, oh, we could go to Elbath. And then we see Luffy and Usopp just both like gasp in the background. Elbath! We're finally going to Elbath! But I love the looks on their faces and everything. It's like, we've been dreaming of that ever since we met the island, the giants on the island. This is way back to, Little Garden and everything, way back at the beginning of the Grand Line. And we just see Robin like, huh? Like, Robin's like listening in on that and getting very interested. And then we just have Luffy and Usopp like singing in the background the way that they do about Elbath and giants and everything like that. And Stussy just looks over at Lucci and she's just like, would you please stop staring at me? Well, she's like sipping her tea. It's just like, yes, I betrayed you. Get over it. This man is basically my father, pointing to like Vegapunk is like the thing that she's putting off there. So Vegapunk is kind of like theorizing. He's like, well, luckily for us, your ship is already in the lavosphere stratum. So we know where it is and we can get to it easily. And since the island is surrounded completely by a marine blockade, it's impossible for us to escape from the coast. So it's like, even if the ship was down there, the ship would already be in a bunch of danger because they're not in the lavosphere where they're safe. So it's a good thing that that's where the ship is. And then we get like this little diagram where we see, where part of the lavosphere is, and where we see where the Sunny is next to where the giant Vegapunk 1. Vega Force 1 is. So we're getting to see that little dynamic there and a little bit of, the compass pointing, northeast and everything for which way they need to go to get off the island. And it's like, well, if we can get to the other side of the island, then Vega Force can, fly us a certain distance away. He states that it only works within a certain distance of the island, which makes sense because they have to keep it within range to keep it, in fully working order and everything. And they're like, well, if we can get, Vega Force 1 can carry us out, and would be able to, carry us past the marine blockade, but then it would stop working. And Frankie's like, oh, don't worry about that. I can take care of that. The Sunny can definitely fly for a certain amount of distance and get us way past the Marines. Which Vegapunk is very, very impressed by this, which I love. And the thing is that this is obviously a referencing a coup de burst or coup de grace, where, they fire off, the giant laser out of the back and it just sends them flying forward. And we've seen them use this several times and everything. We saw them first use this, I believe, when they were escaping from Water 7 to get away from Garp. And, we've seen it multiple other times. The other reference that this could be doing, which would probably be a good way of helping with, steering the Sunny at that point in time, would be in film Stampede. There was where Frankie had outfitted the Sunny to turn it into this flying king penguin thing. And that's how they rode up, the knock-up string to get up to the island, where a good chunk of what happened with, steam with, where a stampede happened. Up the knock-up stream there. So I would not be surprised if that might be like a reference to what he's talking about. Where, like, yeah, they can use the coup de burst to get away, but if Frankie turns it into the penguin one, then they have much more stability for while they're flying. So, or at the very least for while they're going, and then they can use that to help land better. Plus, to help with landing and everything, Luffy and Robin can always activate some of their devil fruit powers to help with that as along the lines as well. And to help with that type of escaping. Unfortunately, this basically says that they'd have to sacrifice, Vega Force 1 and able to escape. But Vegapunk and Frankie are talking, and he's just like, Frankie's like, yeah, I can make it fly for a kilometer, no problem. And Vegapunk is like, oh my word, that sounds so amazing. And he's just like, that'll work. That's our plan then. That's what we're going to go with. And Frankie goes, yeah, it's powered by cola. Vegapunk, cola? Vegapunk is very, very amused by this. Which everybody wanted it to be that, like, Frankie told Vegapunk that, like, a bunch of the Sunny runs on cola and everything, and that Frankie himself runs on cola. So we're going to see, I would like to see more of Vegapunk's opinions on that and everything. So they have that part of the plan. So it's just like, okay, well, we have this plan thought out, but we still have to disable the Frontier Dome before we can even escape. So, yeah, York's like, yeah, you're never going to get the password from me. So it's just like, fine, then we'll hack it. And, like, Vegapunk and Atlas are just like, and Edison are just like, fine, then we'll just hack everything. And they just start hacking away on the computer. Hopefully they're not just pressing the same buttons over and over again, like what it looks like happens a lot of the time in anime. And we see where Vegapunk had, like, talked to Lilith, and he's like, yo, you go get Vega Force 1 set up. Lilith seems to be the main one that tends to work with Vega Force 1 from what we can see, just because that's what we were introduced to her on when they first showed up at the island. So we see her, Frankie, Bonnie, and Luffy all running out of the section of the Lavosphere, the Punk Labs, and heading out. They're still within the Lavosphere and everything, so they're still within the dome where it's safe, but they're heading out to go to where the ship is and where Vega Force 1 is. So that's where they're going. And we need to get it moved, so that'll probably just involve activating Vega Force 1, having it pick up the ship, because it can pick up the ship very easily, and then carry it over to the other side of the island, so that way it's ready for when the Straw Hats are ready to leave. Straw Hats and Vegapunks and Bonnie are ready to leave. Depending on how many Vegapunks besides the Stella end up going with them. So it's just like, hopefully this does fully mean that we are going to Elbath. Finally, I hope. So it's just like, that's what they need to do, and they need to get it all ready, because as soon as the dome comes down, as soon as it's disabled, that is going to allow all of the Marines and whatever other CP agents that they brought with them to be able to get inside. And that's not going to be helpful. So they need to have everything all ready, or else they're going to be very vulnerable to enemy fire, which is what they're pointing out, which is what I believe Lilith and Frankie are pointing out. And Lilith is actually, like, she's actually smiling, and she's like, I've never actually left the island before. And that would kind of make sense, because Vegapunk is probably the main one that would, like, go to the different places and stuff like that, like go to the base where Doll was and treat the kids, and go to Marijua and talk with the Gorosei and everything, where he would probably be the main one that would do that, while the different satellites stayed on the island. Or it may have only been certain ones that actually left the island at times, but Lilith does not seem to have ever left the island. Again, we do not know exactly how, quote-unquote, old the different Vegapunk satellites are, like how long ago he made each of them. But Frankie is like talking to Luffy, he's like, we're not packing for a picnic. Why do you have all of that? And Luffy just has like an entire bag of food, an entire backpack of food. And he's like, the food's here really good and I don't want to miss it. And Bonnie's like, yeah, it is good. And she's like really happy about that and stuff. And like, and I want to bring some pizza. And Luffy's like, oh, we have cheese on the ship. Don't worry about it. Sanji can make us more. And she's like, yay. And, she's very happy and everything. She's like, he's a skilled cook and a good fighter. That's good to know. And Luffy goes, wait a second. Why did you get in a good mood all of a sudden? So weird. And that might be clocking something that I didn't notice before. That's clocking something. And she's like, yeah, I admit I feel much better now that I gave up on killing Vegapunk. So, okay, at the very least, Bonnie seems to not be interested in killing Vegapunk anymore, which is good. So if this really is Bonnie, because they make the thing of like, good, well, you won't be annoying, we won't be annoyed by your crying anymore like last night. She was like, I wasn't crying. So, and I'm sure people are going to point this out since the last time we saw, the island, it looked like, the Blackbeard pirates were making their way there, and that could have been Katarina and Lafitte. And if it is Katarina, and if she did copy Bonnie, and if she's, pretending to be Bonnie, then she would, of course, definitely want to go with the Straw Hats and want to go with Vegapunk. But then there's a question of, okay, would they have been able to get into the dome where it's safe? And get to them in the first place. So there's all of that. The other possibility, unless they do end up pulling that, that it is Katarina disguised as Bonnie, would be Bonnie. Of course, she finished, watching through all of the memories that were in the memory bubble from Kuma, and she's finally been able to actually process them, or at the very least process them enough that she's like, okay, Vegapunk is not the enemy in this circumstance. I don't need to try to hurt him anymore. He might be able to actually help my father. Possibly, somewhat. That my father asked him to do this, and my father allowed this stuff to happen to him for all the experiments and everything. So maybe I don't need to be angry at Vegapunk anymore. So we'll see how that goes. Then we find out then we cut to where we have all the marine battleships all set and ready, all these different sizes of marine battleships, huge ones, medium ones, tiny ones, all over the place, all surrounding, the 100 ships or whatever that is surrounding the island. And they're just like, Rob Lucci has made contact, and he's sending us all this information and everything. Get it to, whoever at once, and everything. And, so we see Saturn and, Kuzan talking again, and he refers to him as Borsalino. And he's like, yeah, the Straw Hats are taking, arrogantly, Straw Hat was talking arrogantly to deceive us in the beginning, in believing that he has control over the whole situation, but it doesn't change the fact that they're still cornered like rats. Hey, you get an animal cornered and you make it angry enough, it is not going to be happy with you. And they're just like talking about like, well, we still, talking about the Frontier Dome, and Saturn is like, well, it utilizes lasers similar to yours, right? And he's like, well, yes, they are similar to mine. They're kind of based off of his. But the one who's guarding the dome is a friend of mine, so that's Kizaru referring to Sentomaru. I'm kind of hoping that by the time the anime gets to this, Oda may have released a little bit more information, like in an SBS or something like that, about this connection a little bit more between Kizaru and Sentomaru, which we got a tiny little bit of that in the last chapter. And then we're going to get a tiny little bit of like this relationship that they have between each other, where they do have a mutual respect for each other, which we see in this chapter as well. Even though what happens, there is this mutual respect there and this mutual, care and compassion for each other there. So I would like it if he either had a couple of additional information things there about Kizaru and Sentomaru and their relationship. I know he did more about Sentomaru's backstory in a recent SBS, but getting a little bit more of that, and then like their relationship together. And then when the anime gets to this, they would then be able to like, okay, well, yes, they can use it as like padding in the episode to like, make it a little bit longer or draw suspense or whatever for what's going to happen, but it's still canon information, and it then gives it a better medium for being able to show it and show that relationship a little bit more between Kizaru and Sentomaru to then add to the drama of what is about to happen. And Saturn's just like, well, you'll just need to ignore him then. And Kizaru's like, he's very determined to fight for his duty, so doing that will go against my ideals. Oh my god, Kizaru has ideals. We found them. He won't hurt someone he actually knows and cares about. Good for you, Sentomaru. Oh, good lord, man, you should have developed a conscience a long time ago. And Kizaru is like, furthermore, if we start our assault now, Sentomaru will surely just order the Mecha Sea Beast and the pacifistas under his control to just attack and sink as many of our vessels as possible within the fleet. And the casualties would be enormous. And so again, Kizaru is at the very least pointing out decent stuff. Kizaru is taking things much more seriously than he normally does from other interactions we've had with Kizaru in the past, which is funny. And then Saturn's just like, okay, well, that's not good. The situation is getting more and more complicated. What about the power plant? Do we have any idea of its location? And then Kizaru pulls out this information that was sent to them by Rob Lucci, and he's like, Rob Lucci is quite shrewd and cunning fellow. He already sent all the info we need. So this is, Lucci probably has like some form of a listening device on his ear, a mini Den Mushi or something that he's talking into. Maybe there's one underneath Kaku's hat, or underneath Hattori's hat. That would be a good place to put it. Is hide the listening device under the pigeon's hat, which is funny. Or maybe it's under Lucci's hat. I don't know. Or it's inside of his hat. Whatever. But he has a listening device, and we saw him whispering into it earlier, and he's like giving them, coordinates for as much as he's aware of within Egghead at that point in time. So we see all of the battleships getting ready, and like battle stations running through and everything, getting everything ready. And then of course we have one of the other admirals is like, all the Rokushiki users, get ready, and like, we have to get, the CP0 agents from the pirates, and we have to be ready to do all of this, and, get ready to attack the Mecha Sea Beasts and all of that stuff. So they're getting all ready for that. Cut back to Luffy, who's bouncing on the clouds for the Sky Island, because he finds those so funny and everything, and Frankie's just like, get your head out of the clouds and get back. We got a goal here. So they get to the Sunny. So, again, this is a little bit more of, okay, it's actually Bonnie, I think, that says that we've arrived at the Sunny, unless it's Frankie that said it first. Bonnie has not been on the Sunny. She didn't land on the Sunny when they first arrived, and unless it's common knowledge the name of the Straw Hat ship, I don't know what to say about that. So that might be an indicator of something. But then again, they have also referred to the Sunny multiple times, and it does have this, she's probably seen it somewhere else before. Either in the paper or whatever, Frankie's, wanted poster recently. So she may just know it that way. So there's that as well. So I'm just like, okay, let's cover our bases on this. And Lilith is heading towards Vega Force 1. So we see Kizaru, powering up his, Yata no Kagame, and sacred Yata mirror, where he's activating his power and everything, and he's getting ready to like ricochet his way through the sea beast and onto the island itself. So he's literally ricocheting his own power with himself as part of it through the island off of the different shiny reflective surfaces to get to where Sentomaru is. And we see Sentomaru there, and he's just like, fine, let's go at it then, Ojiki. And this is where so many people are like, well, Kizaru is Sentomaru's uncle and everything, and it's just like, no. It is literally spelled out here in the translation. It is uncle or father or boss, which is a reference to like the Yakuza family setup that we see that they've referenced before. It's very similar to the mob boss setup that like Beige has with his crew, where like they all call him father, where Vito and the others all refer to him as father. And, he has, his big father, his big castle and everything. So it's a reference to that same type of concept, although it's the Yakuza-based version of it. As opposed to the mob boss face version, which they're very similar types of organizations. It's just the Yakuza, the Japanese version of what how the mob works. I know they're not exactly the same, but so many people are like, aren't they, the same and everything? Like they're getting all, Sentomaru is ready to get all the pacifistas ever, ready and activating, eliminate any of the enemies that show up and everything. And Kizuru is showing up and he's like aiming directly for Sentomaru and he's like, prepare yourself. And she's like, yeah, my defense is the toughest in the world. And we see Kizuru show up and he's, using his, powers, activating his light powers that he's used multiple times and aiming at Sentomaru. And Sentomaru has his hands out and he's probably, I think they said that Sentomaru can use a form of Ryuo. Because I think Luffy has stated that he's kind of seen Sentomaru use it before, along with Rayleigh. So he can use a form of Ryuo, which is probably what he's using here, because it does not look like he is using the vulcanization technique to, harden his, to put the haki on his body and everything like that. So we'll see. This will probably get a little bit more of like adjusted in the anime and everything. And again, there's all the light coming off of Kizuru, so that's going to mess with how the lighting of things work in this regard. So that's happening, and then we have Luffy reacting to it, and he's like, what's that? There's light coming from below. So there's like this huge burst of light that is, even though they're still within the dome, and the Straw Hats and the Vegapunks are still technically safe within the dome itself, Sentomaru is now fighting Kizuru down below, and Luffy is just like, someone very, very strong is coming. So this is clearly this reference, this is clearly like Luffy's haki is allowing him to sense this. I don't know if we've found out. I would assume Bonnie at least has observation and armament haki, at least on basic levels at this point in time, given the fact that she's, was, a captain of the worst generation and everything, and all the rest of the worst generation have all developed haki at this point in time. I would assume that she has it as well. It's probably neither of her versions of haki are probably nearly as high spec as Luffy's by any means, or Zoro's or Sanji's, but she probably still at least has them, because I don't think and I know Stampede is not canon, I am aware of this, I know that it's just a movie. I don't think we ever see her utilize haki at any point in Stampede. We see her use her devil fruit in different ways and stuff like that, but we don't see her actually use haki as far as I'm aware. And I don't think we've ever seen her demonstrate haki at any point in the series. Admittedly, we haven't seen Bonnie in that many fights. So we'll see what happens with that. But Luffy is sensing Kizuru down below, and of course Luffy would be very familiar with Kizuru, A, because of Sabaody, B, because of Marineford, and C, just because of, other things that have happened, and he's aware of who Kizuru is at this point in time. And Kizuru would definitely be one of the admirals that Luffy does not like. So there's that. There's also, someone very strong coming is what he's saying. Again, if Luffy and Katarina Devon are on the island, and then there's also Caribou is somewhere still on this damn island. We don't know where, but he's somewhere. He might still be in the barrel for all I care. So we'll see what happens there. But we still have those three factors that we don't know where Caribou is. We do not know where Katarina and Lafitte are. If they're even on the island, if they managed to get there before the Marines showed up. And if they are there, then the Marines do not know that they are there. But then it's like, okay, then they still have to be able to get into the dome at some point in time. And we don't know how much they know about the dome. And I don't think Katarina Devon has the ability to, like, copy someone's memories. Unless Katarina Devon's set up for copying, like the Skrulls can do in Marvel, also copies, where she copies them and she gets, like, base memories and stuff like that, like surface memories when she copies them. Which is a possibility. And that would be a good way of taking it to the next level as opposed to what Mr. 2 can do with just, his Mane Mane no Mi and everything, where he can just physically copy someone, where if she can also copy, like, very recent memories and stuff like that. That would be a good way of doing that as well for Katarina Devon's fruit, if that's what Oda wants to do, for bringing it to the next level as more than just, oh, I can shapeshift. Or what other types of illusions she can apply, because we don't know the full extent of her devil fruit at this point in time. But that's what we have. That's the end of the chapter. This chapter, I think, is supposed to, technically, the full actual version of it is supposed to come out. The official version is supposed to come out either next Sunday or later this week. So I don't know if there's supposed to be another chapter later this week. I kind of hope not, because I already had to rearrange some videos in order to get this up. And I don't usually do videos on Mondays, but this is where it is now. So that's what I have. I thank you for watching. There should be another chapter next week / week after that, depending on stuff. I hope it doesn't start coming out on Saturdays. Oh God, that's not going to help with my schedule. But that's what we have here. I thank you for watching, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.